Hello there. So, I'm back, and yes, the rumors are true. I do still own a bookshelf. I haven't been forced back into the white void. I think this is a pretty good angle, so maybe we will keep recording at this sort of setup. You can really appreciate, yes, my Unis Honest poster up there, as well as up here. This is from a sad clown painting party that we did, that everybody was supposed to bring home their clowns, but this was literally right before the pandemic and everything shut down, and so we've had these clowns for you know, at least 2 years now, and they all just live in our house now. It was supposed to be only one of or two of them that live there. We keep the clowns. And also in the corner over here, I'm really good at remembering how mirrors work when you gesture. Over here, one of my many children, Bone Spider, is here to join us. So, yes, I am hardly the first person to talk about Onisan, whatever the heck his name is. We can even see it right here. I own the book quite physically. Yeah, I wasn't somebody who originally, ever followed any of the drama around this guy. If you don't know about the drama around this guy, I mean, you'd probably be better off not learning for your own sanity. But basically, old-time YouTuber and very bad, unpleasant kind of person. Trust me, I bought this book secondhand, of course. But the reason that I'm reading it at all, because honestly, sometimes when somebody's really, really bad, I'm not interested in reading their really bad book, because in a way, it's not promotion if I go and slam this into the ground as most people have. But, it's remembering the name at all, and I feel a bit bad about this, but I was so intrigued by, this is Reaper's Creek. You can't really see the title because it's one of the ugliest covers of all time, where you really can't tell what's going on at all. The back is no better. In fact, I kind of hate the back even more. And I was so intrigued by Reaper's Creek. A lot of other YouTubers have covered this book before. I'm hardly the first one making ground, and I would highly suggest you just watch as many people as you can talk about this kind of book, because there's so much to say about Reaper's Creek. There's so much joy. It's not joy. It's whatever unique feeling you get from watching people talk about really bad books. You sure can get it when you watch Strange Aeons or Kappa Kaiju do videos on Reaper's Creek. But here I am doing it as well, because basically I was so intrigued by Reaper's Creek, I had to pick it up for myself, I had to read it for myself, and really get into it fully and in depth, just in case there was anything somebody hadn't mentioned before about the series book. So, I mean, as I'm saying, I picked this up knowing exactly what it was. I'm a bad book aficionado, obviously. Part of my bookshelf over here, you can't quite make out a lot of it, and also I do share it with my flatmates. I had a couple people comment about the books that you can see on it, and I want it to be said that I own two bookshelves, and I share both of them with my flatmate. She's the one who has all of the Discworld books, and also you can see maybe a bunch of Dexter books right around here. I own the rest, and it's split into a crazy mix of things. At some point, I'm going to do a video of just, what's on my shelf. Most of them are books I haven't read yet, and then I have, my pulp collection is right around here, and then my bad book collection is right around here. So I do like owning physical copies of some really bad books. I buy them off eBay secondhand, of course. And, I'm not going to cover too much about Onision himself. I'll talk a little bit about it later when we talk more about the book. But, he's bad. Let's just go into that. And this book is really bad. And honestly, a lot about the author, Onision, can be learned from Reaper's Creek itself. I mean, it's one of the most telling books I've ever read. I feel like you learn so much about the author in this book than pretty much anything I've ever read. Even if I'm reading nonfiction about the author, I feel like this is the most telling story I've ever seen of somebody putting all of their problems are clearly on the table. Death of the author very much exists, but with this book, it's impossible to, death of the author it. It is so obvious everything wrong with this guy inside of the pages of this book. And, I mean, before the book even begins, there is a note that sort of welcomes the insight of looking at it from the point of view of understanding Onision, the author. Because right off the bat, we have this sort of there is more section. And I'll read you a quote from it. "All of my books are not creations of pure fiction. They are simply stories of my own life mixed in with my imagination." And then continues to say, "This book is simply myself, who I was, good and bad, during the time this takes place." So, yeah, he pretty much welcomes me to look at the events of this ludicrous story and kind of puzzle out what are his memories, because he says they're memories, and what are his fantasies. And it's very easy to tell, and increasingly really disturbing. So right off the bat too, before we go into this, if you're not familiar what Reaper's Creek is like, I do have to give some warnings about certain aspects of content. I would say that most of it is not the level that I would normally say severe trigger warning for content, but it definitely contains a few things that are very famously uncomfortable. There's some weird body horror, a lot of it just feels very creepy and gross at times, but the most infamous thing is that there is some underage sex content that is very creepy, to say the least, and I am going to talk about it to a degree. It's not like it's particularly detailed, but it's a very important facet of the story, and that does involve underage, and it's not technically statutory, but it's extremely weird. And so if you're not comfortable with that, that's definitely going to come up. I will try to put in the description like an exact timestamp of when I mention that area. But that's a reoccurring thing we're going to get into. Before we begin, this book contains content which is definitely not suitable for all viewers. In fact, I would say that this book is not suitable for anybody. But especially it deals with a lot of very sensitive subjects. It deals with them poorly. As always, when we do books like this, and when I cover these sorts of things, I'm doing it simply for review and commentary purposes. I am not going to be reading anything that is especially gratuitous, but I will be discussing the content. Some of it, too, is unfortunately reoccurring themes, and thus there will be a fair amount of detail, and if that is something that you are not prepared for or need to be prepared for, let me tell you about them now. So major content warnings for child abuse, very creepy sexual content, including sexual content involving minors. There is pedophilia, pedophilic characters going on. These are things that are not specifically described, but rather characters who are pedophiles, which is very bad, and child abuse characters. There is murder and violence and death to an especially over-the-top degree, including mass murder. The murder of children is included. They are alien children, but even then. There is content involving some body horror and things like that. Mind control, of course, how very bad. And some things regarding to, when I say child abuse too, I mean physical alterations. And some things with alcohol as well. In general, this book is not one that should be read or engaged with if you are particularly young. Thank you. A lot of the time I like to start a section or even a book review with just a little quote to give you a taste of what the writing is like, and potentially related to, say, the theme, which is right now, let's cover the main plot. Unfortunately, the main plot of this book is very jarring and starts out very boringly, so here is a quote to illustrate that. There's no page numbers because there are no page numbers in this book. Fun fact. "I wanted to go up the trail to swing alone, but I felt a familiar wet dew on my feet. Of course, I wasn't wearing any socks or shoes yet." I would like to enter that into one of the most boring sentences of all time. So our protagonist is Daniel. Daniel is 11 years old and he lives with his stepfather and his mother. His father is semi-estranged and very religious, and despite being an accused sexual predator towards young girls, his father still has shared custody over Daniel and his two sisters. Daniel is a completely average kid, nothing remarkable, despite the fact that inexplicably he describes himself as having sort of chiseled good looks at 11 and being 5'10" at 11. 5'10" is taller than me. If I met an 11-year-old who was 5'10", I would be absolutely terrified. I'm already scared of, like, 11-year-olds. And then one of them that is taller than me is, like, an alien in somebody else's skin. Maybe that's important, because aliens are going to come back. Maybe it's on purpose. It's probably not on purpose. I assume the author has a complex about his height. So the start of Reaper's Creek is incredibly mundane. It immediately feels like a series of stories and half-memories. I mean, in some ways, it's very convincingly written. Not well written, but very convincingly written book, because I entirely believed everything that happened up to about the halfway point was based on real events. That's not a good thing, because the real events are exceedingly boring, but everything is this very vague and filled with random details, and then suddenly there'll be a section that is like, I'll call it a set piece, where it's like, definitely one extracted from the author's childhood that he has just put in there. He's like, I don't remember being 11 too well, but I remember this happening when I was 11, so that is how I will write my 11-year-old character. I'll just put a memory, one in there. For example, there's a section where Daniel is swinging on a swing very fast, and then he leaps in the air, and he leaps way farther than he normally does. And that doesn't really illustrate anything. It doesn't come back later. I wouldn't call it foreshadowing to the supernatural sci-fi elements that come in later. I think that this is something that he remembers as a kid, jumping really far once, and was like, I'll put that in my book. Yeah, it's not really any interesting details, but at the very least, I'm very positive that these were all extracted from his childhood, just straight up. There's a lot of these details, like, his best friend spits on his hand before they do high fives, and that's just gross, but okay. His uncle has a scene where he really pressures Daniel to drink alcohol at 11. The creek in Daniel's backyard is full of these dead fish that he shoots arrows into. And Daniel also has this thing where he imagines immense violence just randomly for fun. Like when he sees his school pull up in the morning, he imagines and tries to fake you out that it has exploded horrifically. And that one I actually totally believe an 11-year-old would do. It's a bit weird, but I can imagine perhaps a strange 11-year-old doing that sort of thing. Though it probably should be said, I'm almost certainly never going to read Onisian's other two books, but the main character imagining immense violence for fun is a reoccurring theme, which I think is a bit worrying, because I know that at least in one of them, there's pretty much the same scene where a teenager imagines, I believe, a bomb going off at the Super Bowl for fun. So we should probably be keeping more of an eye on this guy, is what I'm saying. Here, let me read you another amazing quote from the first part of this book. Again, one of the most dull quotes in existence, but hey, you know, it's good for learning how to write better books, right? That's why we do this, right? The bus pulled up and took us to school. Just like I remembered, the smell was the same, the stops were pretty much the same, and the school itself looked the same. It's good writing. It's not good writing. It's very likely that a lot of this book is based on the author's actual childhood, which does add this sad and creepy factor to a lot of it, especially as, you know, while the book starts, nothing really happens besides these sort of mumbled, boring anecdotes from being in elementary school. The actual story crops up a little way in. It takes way too long, in the form of an alien that Daniel sees in his dreams every night, and this alien is, like, experimenting on him. And this is actually another detail that I think is lifted from real life. Not that Onision was experimented on aliens, but rather that he would have had reoccurring dreams of an alien experimenting on him. Because when I was a kid, around this age, and for way too long, I had sleep paralysis every single night. And I had a lot of, you know, when you have sleep paralysis, you wind up with a lot of really specific irrational fears, or a lot of people have reoccurring dreams that indeed could take the form of aliens experimenting on them. So I actually believe that the whole premise of this book, of the alien experimentation, is because Onision probably had reoccurring dreams about an alien experimenting on him when he was a kid. 100% I think that that's probably true. So anyways, for the actual plot, Daniel gets from the alien that is real the ability to sense and see death. The death thing is basically like video game markers. They're these quest markers that he has to clear out around his house. Like he sees like a red little map icon that he has to run to so it will disappear or else he won't be able to get any sleep. Daniel's rather upset by this power that just points out every dead thing in the radius. You know, it's kind of distressing. And the alien, who he realizes is actually the special ed kid, quotes around that's what he's called in his school. Because basically, he realizes that the alien and this special education kid share the same tics, which is really gross and ableist, obviously. I don't know how much I have to point that out. Extremely tasteless. Please don't do that, but that is exactly what happens, and he realizes this kid is actually an alien. And, again, not much happens for a beginning until one day, Daniel accidentally melts his mother's eyeballs in rage, and then he accidentally regrows his mother's eyeballs, after which he starts acting extremely calm and happy and almost brainwashed. Yeah, and that's sort of just the thing that just passes by and we don't remark upon it, but his powers are escalating. The alien lets Daniel know that it can only reach him when he's not under a metal roof, for some reason, and Daniel thus wraps himself in tinfoil and has this fine sleep. I'm going to call it a fine sleep. I might, put a little asterisk there. We're going to come back on this one dream until a different alien shows up, tears off his roof, experiments on him more, and then in response, the kid alien attacks Daniel in the bathroom to fix what this alien did to him. Yeah, it's a bit confusing. There's two aliens. There's the alien kid who has been experimenting on Daniel, but slightly in a nicer way, than the other aliens who just randomly show up the moment they can to also experiment on Daniel. And the alien part of the plot is not suitably explained, and it's confusing, so just roll with it. And, yeah, that is actually like the beginning of the book, because at this point we sort of have a year time skip. Yeah, and this is where we're going to put a bit of a warning about what happens on a summer vacation. So Daniel is somehow still 11. It's been a year, but he's like 11, who knows. And he's visiting his father, the Predator, though he's unrelated to this, in Ohio, when he meets a girl named Julia. It's unclear if he's actually met her, last year, since the start of the book mentions him having a crush on a girl who looks just like Julia. It's also unclear why Julia's nickname is Julie. She is called Julie most of the book, but her name is Julia. I don't know. So Julia is 15, and Daniel has a huge crush on her. And she rather weirdly reciprocates, which leads to sex. I don't think I have to cover this too much. I don't really want to. It's a short sex scene, thankfully, but the fact that there is a sex scene between an 11-year-old and a 15-year-old is extremely gross and should not exist at all, because this is not something that is portrayed as bad in any way, or weird, or strange, or absolutely anything. This is portrayed as both normal and good, because they continue to be a main relationship in the rest of the book. But anyways, talking about that scene, I do want to read one sentence in the middle of it, which is not describing any of the actual sexual content, thank God, but it's extremely funny because it is in the middle of this scene. And that is, the fabric of the couch had a purple base color and a design paying tribute to the natives of America. I mean, if you're going to write an extremely creepy sex scene, then at least we get to know that their couch is paying tribute to the natives of America. So, with Julia, or Julie, whatever, I sort of believe that there was a Julia in Onishian's life. Again, this book is very heavily based on his life in a lot of ways, and that means that, and he invites it, I'm gonna speculate a bit, and I think that there probably was a Julia in his life. Hopefully not one that he had sex with when he was 11, but maybe as a teen he had a thing for her, or she was a teen that he kind of had a crush on when he was 11 over vacation. And so a lot of this book turns into and is wish fulfillment, and I'm going to cover a lot of the wish fulfillment in depth later, But so on the plane ride home from this very memorable vacation, Daniel runs into the alien kid and kills him with a fork in the neck. Just really casually. It's, whatever. So then, after killing that, he's picked up by the second group of aliens, who thank Daniel for doing so. However, Daniel at this point is really tired of being abducted by aliens nonstop, so he starts screaming and realizes he can explode them by screaming. But then he realizes, actually, if he just thinks about them dying, they will explode, so he stops screaming. However, as he's just murdering all of the aliens on this big spaceship, he grows bored immediately with his psychic alien murder and then just starts imploding their spaceship, and then he flies down to his body because I guess he's astral projected, abducted this time. Yeah, cool. So now we have a much bigger time skip. At this point, Daniel is 14, still uncomfortably young, but he will be about 14 for the rest of the book. His psychic powers have grown massively, and he uses them to influence everything and everyone in his life to be ideal. Julia calls him when he misses her and ignores him when he doesn't feel like talking to her. His best friend, who was kind of weird and gross as a kid, is now great, and he's in all of his classes. Daniel passes all of his classes, and whatever he wants simply happens. He has unlimited mind control. There's no obstacles or challenges to Daniel. I mean, there won't be in this book in general, but especially right now as we kind of return to imposed time script. Like, at one point, he realizes one of his classmates is an alien, again, in human form, and he just instantly kills him. He flies up to the ship that the aliens came from, realizes it's a trap, but he's entirely immortal and unaffected, so then he kills all of the aliens who set the trap. Then he returns back to his body, it's been a few seconds in gym class, and life just moves on and it's completely fine. No one cares, he has absolute power, and that's gonna be the rest of the book. It's just about what if I had absolute power, wish fulfillment. So Daniel realizes that he can control the world, even the universe, and he's this unlimited powerful. And then suddenly he gets tired of all the fakeness around him, because, he's been controlling all of his classmates, his school, everything, and he suddenly gets sick of it. So he dispels the mind control that he's had over people. His best friend remarks that he dislikes Daniel and hasn't liked him since elementary school. His smiley mother, whose eyes he exploded years ago, is actually really still disturbed by the exploding eye thing. There's a certain maybe interesting element at play here. This is the one thing that I will maybe give this book. I dislike giving this book anything. It feels gross. But there is something to the idea of the unconscious mind control that Daniel did to his mother and perhaps in general. He knows that he was controlling the mind of everybody around him to lead this ideal life. But he was doing that against their will, and also, he might have done it accidentally. Because we see quite early in the book, he accidentally explodes his mother's eyes, she's freaking out, and then he regrows them, and suddenly she's happy, she's smiley, she's like a great mother, basically. And that suggests that Daniel had unwittingly controlled her mind years ago, and that he didn't seem to intentionally do it. When he dispels mind control over the world, suddenly she's upset about that still. Which is kind of a horrifying notion. I mean, remember that one Twilight Zone episode about the kid who can, murder people, send them to the cornfield, just control the world like that? That's a really horrifying idea that the mother has basically perhaps woken up from years of being trapped in her body, forced to be happy with her terrifying son. Or perhaps even had like a time skip and suddenly is woken up in this brand new world. It's a really unsettling horror idea, and I don't think the book is entirely oblivious to that, because again, Daniel accidentally controlled his mother's mind, and then here releases it perhaps as a side effect of releasing the ones that he's intentionally done. And there's something to Julia here too, which the book does not explore because it's not a good book. And that's that the natural reading that we can take about Daniel's mind control powers is that he was attracted to Julia and without being aware made her interested in him. So there's a moment back when Daniel is 11 where he thinks that he missed his chance with Julia. He kind of is really into Julia and he is like, I wouldn't call flirting with her, but basically like they're hitting it off. And then something happens and she kind of like leaves, and it's like, oh no, I missed my chance with her. It's like, you're 11, you had no chance. This is really gross. Please stop. But also, the moment he starts cursing the fact he messed up with Julia, Julia returns and is suddenly extremely into him. So that, again, suggests that Julia is as much a victim here of the mind control, and that the whole creepy sex thing becomes a side effect of it. And in that way, you could almost call the book almost clever-ish, smart-ish. It could be that we've been all reading the weird underage sex thing wrong, and that it's meant to be unsettling because it is an 11-year-old who is just on like the cusp of puberty, discovering he has godlike powers, controlling the world, and, you know, making all of this happen, including Julia, who is a 15-year-old girl. And yeah, that's quite unsettling, but it becomes unsettling in like a sort of horror, disturbing way. You could do something good with that, but I also don't think the book is on that level, because, of course, the moment that the mind control ends, Julia still is very into Daniel, genuinely loves him, she's unaffected by the release of mind control, and yeah, she's just the love interest, one true love for the rest of the book. So anything that might be a clever subversion of the first reading is actually completely ruined by that. I'm going to read the scene where he releases the mind control now. David was smiling across the room from me. 2 pretty teachers with cleavage showing stood by waiting for me to address them at the entrance of the room. I looked at all of them and I smiled. Something is about to change, I said. The teacher with larger breasts than most anyone I'd seen replied, "What do you mean, cutie?" and click. Just like that, their smiles faded. Both teachers were overcome with an expression of confusion and immediately left the room. David stood up, looked me in the eyes, lifted his finger and said, "I don't know what's going on, but I haven't liked you since elementary school. Stay away from me." He then proceeded to leave the room. So Daniel, at this point, releasing all the mind control, he leaves his home to go be with Julia. However, she is suddenly shot and killed by an assassin who is wearing red and black polka dot suit for inexplicable reasons. Daniel kills him, and then departs to go kill every other alien in disguise on Earth in a few seconds. He already has been kind of doing this with aliens in the sky, and now he's like, there's aliens in disguise on Earth, I'm gonna kill them all. And he does it personally. He realizes he could just, like, say a word and they'd all die, but he wants to do it one by one, personally, because he's so rage-filled. And, yeah, here's a quote on that. "There were creatures in the bodies of children. Their adopted mothers screamed at the loss of them. Some of them had fathers who cried. Some of them had no fathers at all." Daniel then revives Julia and gives her a special stone, like the one he has in his head, because he has a stone in his head, which will make her all-powerful and immortal just like him. He just, like, he has a special stone that gives him all these powers. He just looks at it, he's like, look, here's the second one, because he's all-powerful. He decides at this point he should start editing the world to fix it, using a very simplistic mindset of how that would go down. His first thought is to basically eliminate darkness in the world and make a place where everyone is just happy. Julia at least points out that this is basically a lobotomy of the world's population. And, yeah, indeed, forcibly and physically altering everyone who he thinks needs to be edited to meet a vague criteria is a bad idea. I mean, it's odd that Daniel doesn't realize this decision to edit the world to make them just happy is exactly what he'd been doing at his high school before he left. But what does Daniel wind up thinking? Okay, I need to improve the world. So what is Daniel's eventual patch notes? Let's find out. I strengthened potential victims of crimes. I designed defense mechanisms, enhanced aspects of the human body to strike back in a natural yet bold manner. Fingernails became strong as steel. There no longer was an imbalance between genders. Children were given the natural inclination to know the locations of their parents, and their parents had the same connection to their children, so they could never be lost or abducted efficiently. I treated the world like lines of code in a video game, changing hit points, stamina, strength. I redesigned our species. Thanks, Daniel. This is incredibly stupid. Since when has brittle fingernails been the downfall of humanity? In fact, all of his designs are Well, they're vague, for one. I mean, strengthening the potential victims of crimes is very, very. Anybody can be a victim of crime. Let's just, first of all, lay that on the table. Secondly, the moment that some people get, like, cybernetic enhancements, then maybe the people without them become victims of crimes, and then you have to, everybody should just be getting them. But then also we have the children having built-in GPSs to their parents is good until they are adopted in any way, for example, or have abusive parents, because it's vice versa, so you can never escape your parents. That's horrible. And the imbalance between genders is a lovely term, because there isn't necessarily, what exactly did you do? I mean, we're going to come back to the imbalance in genders thing, because we do know one thing he did. But yes, his ideas of improving the human race, the only specific thing we really get is GPS and fingernails, and I'm not sure that those were the failings of the human race. So Daniel and Julia go to visit her father, and I'm going to be reading another quote, but this is like the time in the book where there's just so much ludicrous nonsense, I feel like I have to put in these quotes. This is the father speaking. He spouted out, "So women have teeth on their crotches now, eh, Daniel? In the middle of my lemonade, I tried to swallow without a hiccup. Yes, I thought it would make sense." Her dad looked concerned. "What do you mean?" I replied sincerely. "I mean, men have their swords. Women should have their blades too, right?" Okay. And by the way, with these quotes, I am preserving errors and formatting, so it looks a bit funky. That is on purpose. Sometimes I transcribe and I mess up a little bit more. But in general, I try to preserve the natural artistic decisions of having really poor formatting in these books. So at this point, I mean, before I even get to this point, oh my god, he gave all women vagina dentata, or whatever it's called. He gave them teeth. That's horrible. That's just so bad. I don't think that a lot of people want that. Can you imagine if you woke up one day, it's unclear, well, it is clear actually, people do know that these changes are taking place. You wake up one day, and all of reality has been changed, and probably most people, Daniel doesn't say he's like on TV announcing this, most people are just waking up and suddenly finding that reality around them keeps changing, but also it's changing to the sensibilities of a immature 15-year-old, which is terrifying. People with vaginas are waking up with teeth in there. That is a really terrifying most people do not want that. I am quite sure that most people really don't want that. And is not equivalent. The quote, "men have their swords, so women should have their blades," they're definitely not equivalent. Because the implication there is basically just the penis is equivalent to having teeth in that zone, and it's not, and I really don't like that idea, and I really wish it wasn't in this book, but it is, and I have to tell you about it. So anyways, at this point, Daniel realizes that Julia's father, like Daniel's father, is a child predator, and immediately he murders him. Julia is understanding about this murder, but is distraught, so Daniel drops a lovely black coffin in the middle of their living room with his mind, and fills it with money. And then he flies away. This is just in the middle of dinner, he, like, reads the father's mind, murders him, drops a coffin of money, and then leaves. So Daniel, at this point, returns to his childhood home and the old creek, which he finds is full of dead women. He just walks over there and he can suddenly sense, oh my god, there's dead women buried everywhere. He realizes they've all been killed by a guy named Gary. And as he flies off to go murder Gary, he suddenly, and without control, changes appearances into, like, He-Man, I would describe him, which is what he'll look like for the rest of the book. It's not explained, and out of everything very weird in this book, it might be the weirdest thing in my mind, just the fact that he randomly transforms into He-Man. Here we go, here's the scene. As the water shot off in all directions, my hair extended outward, doubling in length. My hair turned from brown to golden blonde, and my skin heated till the water steamed off it, leaving me dry, still holding a piece of a woman's leg in my hand. My hair was so bright now and flowed to my shoulders. But why? My soul shot out of my body without hesitation, and I was immediately able to see a man with blue eyes, broad shoulders, at least 6 feet tall, standing there. He looked like he was in his late 20s, almost double my age. What I can only think is that Daniel is so powered by his mind and his wants and his, wish fulfillment. So him going to get justice on the serial killer that he stumbles upon is such a heroic act in his mind that he unconsciously transforms into a heroic body, which is a odd notion, but it's the most I can think of, because one thing that we have to come around to with the wish fulfillment in this book and just the whole thing is that it might be best to think of a lot of the decisions in this book as coming from somebody who hasn't mentally matured past about 11, because when Daniel's 11, he suddenly gets godlike powers, and he's 15 at this point, but he's not a normal 15-year-old. He's been controlling the world since he was 11, meaning his maturity level and thought process very much might have entirely stopped at that point. And so the notion that he might turn into a He-Man gladiator because he feels like he's stopping an evil serial killer, I guess it makes a bit of sense in that way. But I also, again, caution that analyzing this book on a deeper level is very difficult because it's a really bad book. So, anyways, there's more ultra-fast murdering as Daniel clears out Gary and all of his friends, except for one man who was forced against his will to help Gary, who gets to die peacefully. And there's this lovely, tasteless note as this man dies that he was obese in life, but as his body slumped forward, a much thinner man stood up and walked out of him. Joseph was whole again. Oh my gosh. So, the whole Gary serial killer plot, by the way, it takes up a bit, and it feels so random. It's 1 to 2 chapters. It really doesn't matter at all. You could cut it out and there would be zero difference besides the fact that he now looks like He-Man. Daniel at this point is suddenly attacked by the Grim Reaper. Whoa. And Grim Reaper is a creation of God. He turns the Grim Reaper into a marble, and then he decides, I'm gonna go kill God. He finds out that God is the son of a much more powerful being named Cole. To help him kill God, Daniel creates the body, which is a second version of himself. He then flies into space and fights God. It's a really, really boring scene. I don't have any quotes. He also learns that God had a sister, who God assaulted and killed out of jealousy, and that the sister is the one who made Earth and humanity. Daniel goes to confront Cole about God, and though Cole is now really weak and sad about his horrible son, God, Daniel is all-powerful and just totally eliminates God from existence, and then revives God's unnamed dead sister, which Cole couldn't do. But Daniel's so strong. And the universe is thus solved. God's sister takes control of Earth again, tells Daniel to please stop editing it, and tells him the homeworld of the aliens who harassed him as a kid. He learns from the aliens that God told them to try and kill Daniel because God was afraid of Daniel. He also learns that his real mother is God's sister. I'm not totally sure how that works, but yeah, his real mother is God's sister. So, years in the future, everything is perfect. God's sister rewrote all of Earth and humanity, so there's peace and happiness now. Daniel ends the book by talking about how perfect his mother is and how happy he is. Yeah, legitimately. I mean, the last chapter is even called Mother. It's about this long, and it's strange. So, here is the end of the book. 2 different paragraphs. I searched code of prisons, military bases, even cancer hospitals, and they were all gone. Cole's daughter had done what I was afraid to do. She didn't acknowledge opinions or cultures, simply rebuilt the world in the way she deemed fit. And this is a couple paragraphs later. Just like the new god of Earth instructed me, I didn't physically alter the code of her planet or the people on it whatsoever. But I didn't need to, as my original mother was perfect, and no matter how much I evolved, she would still be wiser than me, which is the end thought of this book. There's a lot to say about that. I mean, oh my gosh, the fact that it ends with this absolute mommy complex. Daniel's mother was first portrayed as very nice, his human mother, as it were, was first portrayed as rather nice and understanding, but then out of nowhere turns out to be extremely abusive to Daniel. So the fact that now he has a perfect mommy goddess lady is, well, it's very fitting. And in fact, let's talk a little bit more about Onision and how his views and feelings are so obviously in every aspect of this book. So Onision, whatever the heck his name is, he is a bad person who thinks that he isn't a bad person. He is a groomer, a wetlands destroyer, a predator, a creep. Seriously, he destroyed some wetlands at one point, like what? More also, allegedly, a lot of other things. He's a once famous YouTuber from the cursed lands of the, double O's, and he has also a tendency to have weird race things in a lot of his books. He has fatophobia in a lot of his books, and he has a hatred very much for religion and vegetarians. He enjoys thinking about mass death, murders, and shootings way too much, and he writes women in a way one could describe as bad. However, he doesn't think of himself as any of these things. I mean, I guess very few people think of themselves as bad, but he definitely doesn't. One noteworthy thing about this book is how very much it has this forced feminism that you can, just feel how forced it is, and also how he thinks that he is such a feminist icon. He very clearly doesn't understand the idea of feminism and women's rights. I mean, yeah, you might be trying to think in the summary then where in this book there's anything remotely feminist, because I've described to you what this book is. But that's because he's an idiot who can't write. The feminist things, or at least the idea that he thinks he is a woman's rights hero, is the fact that there is an insane amount of sexual assault and predatory behavior in this very short book. It's a super short book. It's a clean and breezy. I think 2 hours is how long it took me to get through it. Less than a lot of movies. And in that time, we have Daniel's pedophile father, Julia's pedophile father, Gary the serial killer of 14 women. All of these people are punished, the latter two by very violent, very personal death. To Daniel, or Onision, it is a powerful move for him to write disgusting men and then have them pay for the crimes he wrote. He is further trying to seem like a hero when his changes to humanity explicitly include vagina teeth for women, defense equality between genders, and empowering the would-be victims of crime. All of this adds up to this worldview that I think is clearly reflected, where Onision feels like he is the protector of women, when really it shows an extremely laughable understanding of the topic. And, obviously, I think it links to his hero complex, which is everywhere in this book. The whole book is a hero complex. It's mentioned in the text more than once. He acknowledges the hero complex. Daniel is aware that he has one, and that is basically Onision acknowledging there's a hero complex to all of this. But that's no excuse. Because of the psychology of Onision, you can pretty quickly pick up by reading or watching about this guy. It's clear that the ideas in this book are his actual fantasies and ideas. They're not pure fiction. He is Daniel. And at the start of the book, he kind of admits to that. He says, this book is based on my life in a lot of ways. He is Daniel, and at one point the main character is literally called Greg, which is Onision's real name. Onision wants this world without mental illness, cancer hospitals, and war, and his dream of fixing it is to simply delete all of those things. It's this extremely naive worldview. And it would sort of make sense if this book was about an 11-year-old stuck as an 11-year-old but with godlike power. It fits the idea in that way of an 11-year-old naively fixing things. The problem is that you can obviously tell that Onision agrees with the 11-year-old. This is not fiction. These are what he thinks would be good. To edit all of humanity at once, ignorant of cultures and wishes, is to remove free will and expression, and also humanity. If everyone remembers what happened, you aren't effectively doing as much. I mean, they'll still likely feel some horror at this terror of mass editing, but, you're not changing much. They're still going to be as they are. If they don't know what happened, they are all different people now. You have created not humans who cannot react in the same way, whose brains function differently, and who are incapable of natural feelings and expressions in your pursuit of a happy world. A utopia cannot be a place where everyone is simply the same, but that is what the end of the book suggests. There's nothing, I don't know, ironic? Ironic's not the right word. There's nothing purposeful about the fact that the end of the book has this mother goddess come in and rewrite the world without caring about culture and all of that, and that is a bad thing, that is anything not ideal. It is written as if, happy ever after, she rewrote humanity where I was afraid to, and she did a great job. And that's portrayed as a very good thing, which is, it's not. It's a very childish idea, but the book doesn't know that, and that's why a lot of the time where I can see where this book, in a very different sense, has the idea of what it could work. That is so poorly phrased, but what I'm saying is that a story, a horror about an 11-year-old who is stuck at 11 because he gains these godlike powers from alien experimentation, you could kind of do something with that, and you could have a lot of the really poor decisions he makes and the unintentional mind control be horror elements, be the idea of, you know, he shouldn't have this power, but he does. But instead, it is not written to be horror. It's written to be just sheer wish fulfillment by the author. And he genuinely, definitely wants this sort of world. And that's bad. There's something else to be said about the fact that both dads and all grown men in this book are criminals. And that is that the author has issues. He so obviously has issues. I know that I'm not going to plan to ever read his other books, as I said, but I know that it's a theme in his other books. Onision has daddy issues. And mommy issues. And issues. Daniel's stepfather seems super nice at first, but then in the time skip, we suddenly learn that he drank, used drugs, and beat Daniel's mother. His mother is praised by Daniel at first as being a good mother, but then repeatedly fights with him and threatens later to beat him with a belt, which he just responds to like it's completely typical. Of course, both his biological father and Julia's biological father are child predators. It's only when Daniel learns his mother is actually God's sister that he feels some deep peace and love, and it ends the book literally praising her. So you can just feel the definite issues by the author there. This is not a realistic, normal situation where every single person in the world is a criminal, but he obviously has issues with them and doesn't know how to write a father that isn't some sort of horrible person. Or a mother that isn't there's just no good parents whenever he writes. And another issue that we can talk about with Onision is the violence and killing is absurd. It's not like gory, but it's absolutely ludicrous how much violence and killing there is. Daniel flies around murdering everybody on a spaceship, or a portion of Earth's population, and he feels the need to do it in person. He relishes in murder to an uncomfortable degree, especially the most brutal murder in the book, which is that of Gary, the serial killer. All of this is brushed aside as just meaningless, but also necessary, even when he's personally slaughtering alien children in front of their adopted mothers, who don't know they're aliens. Early in the book, there's that fake out where Daniel basically imagines a school bus exploding, killing everyone inside and piercing his friend and cousin with shrapnel. And then he just says, oh, well, I was just imagining it because it's fun. That's really uncomfortable how much of a theme that is in your book. As I always say, I don't like to psychoanalyze. I don't like to, I like death of the author. But this book is Onision. This is him, and this is a very bad insight into his mind. And yeah, Julia. I mean, I don't really want to say much about Julia, because we'll get to the Julia. I mean, we get the Julia thing, right? I mean, 11-year-olds are children, and the idea of this being a mutual romantic and sexual connection between a child and a 15-year-old, also a child, but a teen, is insane and super gross. There's only one reference to it being weird, and it's Daniel saying their relationship wouldn't be approved of by parents because of the age gap. But otherwise, it's portrayed as this ideal relationship with a genuine love as its heart. And it's no better when he's 14. She's 18 then. At least they could have been in high school together at that point, but it's no better when that happens. This book is wish fulfillment, as I've said a lot. One problem, of course, I can't tell if Onision knows. On one hand, Daniel literally has his wishes granted with his mind subconsciously before he can control it. On the other hand, I don't trust the author to be at all self-aware. This is the fantasy of a kid and a grown adult who basically wants to be all-powerful, have everybody either fear or love him, have the perfect girl, succeed at everything, and rewrite all the flaws he sees in humanity. Oh, and also kill everyone he hates effortlessly. It's a bit uncomfortable because of that at times, because it feels like a masturbatory exercise in self-worship. And it's also very boring. I mean, the book picks up a bit when all this nonsense starts happening, and it's a pretty breezy read despite the really poor writing. However, there is no plot to this book at all, and obviously there's no stakes when the main character is immortal and all-powerful. He whisks around space, killing the 3 parts of God, and winds up so powerful he can just revive another god, or make a giant clone of himself with the same godstone he has in his head, which he can just print repeatedly. You want to read more to see what awkward dialogue is coming next, and like what harebrained commentary Onision will try and make, but the actual meat and action of the book is very dull, and it just... There's nothing clever about it. I keep wanting to be like, oh, maybe there is something clever. As much as I hate the author, I read books with an honest and open mind. And so when I see the idea of this crazy wish fulfillment becoming God, I keep seeing the potential there for something, and I want to give the benefit of the doubt at times, that maybe there is something deeper going on here. Maybe some of these choices were on purpose. But the end of it, when you really just look at the book as a whole, when you think about it for 2 seconds, you go, no, it's just wish fulfillment. There's nothing thoughtful about it or clever. It's just a show of Daniel's perfect life as he matures and ascends to a perfect godhood and gets to kill anyone he likes while looking super cool and getting lots of sex. That is the whole brunt of this book. That is all it is. And, is that a disappointment? I knew it wasn't going to be any good. I knew it wasn't going to be more. But there is something more there as an idea that I often find with these sorts of bad books. And with Reaper's Creek, it's unique. My overall take with Reaper's Creek is that I have read a lot worse books than it. But it is overall a very unique book, as I keep saying. I'm excited to keep it. This is one of those things where sometimes I don't keep my really bad books, but I do have a selection of them on my shelf. And I kind of want a cabinet display of rare bad books to like show off to visitors, you know? Oh, would you like some wine? And can I interest you in an Ebony Flames? If you want to read it, it's probably a pretty good bad book rec. It's ridiculous, but it's also very short. And while the writing often rambles and has like plenty of errors, it's understandable enough that it won't give you a headache like some books I've read. The plot is super funny, and there's a lot you can just quote to your friends and laugh over. Just obviously never buy it new, find secondhand or pirated copies. Onision is literally a criminal.